You have a Bible this morning. I'll ask you to turn to start at least, the book of Mark, chapter 5. Excuse me. I'll likely have you turn to a few stories this morning as we try to talk about our thought. We're going to set aside the series that we've been in for a few weeks and just felt inclined to go a different direction, at least for this morning. And I intend, at least, it's where my heart has been drawn, but I'm going to take a longer path there to get back to the passage that we'll read to start this morning. It's Mark chapter 5, and we're just going to read verse 35 and 36. It says this: "While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? And as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe." That'll conclude our reading this morning, at least for the time being. And I would like to give a title to the message today, Spiritual Caretakers. Spiritual caretakers, bringing them to Jesus, I guess would be a subtitle today. Over the last couple of years, we have seen a tremendous amount of natural caretaking at our church in various capacities. Of course, there's the obvious parents who care for their children, various stages of their infancy all the way up until teenage years and sometimes beyond. And what a demand that is to caretake. When a child's born, if you don't, they're going to die. The most simple tasks have to be done by a parent, and so most of the time a mother's full-time job every minute of every day is to have her mind occupied by the needs of this child. And we have seen in our church as well, in the last few years, others who have had a spouse, or some who have had parents, that they've had to be caretakers. And that's hard for a lot of reasons. You have to often help someone who has been independent, self-sufficient, and now suddenly they're going through difficulty and they can't sometimes do the most simple tasks. Sometimes you have to guess at what their need is. Sometimes you have to try, and then you fail, and then you try, and then you fail, and the morale, the fatigue, both physically and emotionally, spiritually, because all these physical things do have a spiritual component. There is a link between our physical life and our spiritual life. When you are tired physically, it will affect your spiritual life. When you are emotionally burnt out, it will greatly impact your spiritual life. And it requires something that I won't talk about in detail today, but I think part of the reason why our particular culture struggles with this is because it requires a level of dying to self that we have sought to eliminate in our culture. And yet, I'll say this morning that the diminishing number of physical caretakers is perhaps only surpassed by the limited number of spiritual caretakers today. We all have a hidden life. It's a spiritual life. I want to plumb this for just a moment, that there are obviously layers to our life. I often use the example of thinking in concentric circles. We have our circles. Starts really close, and then it expands outward. For most people, they have acquaintances and neighbors that they rarely talk to, but they know about, they grew up with, that they occasionally have contact with. Then you get a little closer and you got distant cousins that you grew up with and you share some unique identity or some unique relationship or experience together and it bonds you. And then you start getting into the day-to-day life where you have coworkers and people that you probably more on a shallow level, but still you have interactions with regularly. And then you have your family. And sometimes it's your family that's your closest, and sometimes you have particular people that are friends that are your real close inner circle. And then often you have, for a lot of people, this isn't all people, you have a spouse. And that's like the most sensitive things, the most hidden parts of you come out in that setting. But I want to contend that that's not the center. There's another concentric circle. And that is your hidden spiritual life. When you're not talking about things to other people, even under the guise of secrecy or intimacy, talking in that about sensitive stuff, that layer that is solely reserved for you and God. There's a lot that we could say about that hidden spiritual life. There's a lot that we could say that feels convicting to me to contemplate about that hidden spiritual life. But I bring that up this morning because one aspect of that hidden spiritual life is spiritual caretaking. Spiritual caretaking has a lot in common with regular caretaking, of caretaking, but it's got some fundamental differences that are really important to note. Physical caretaking is almost always perceivable. Spiritual caretaking rarely is. Here's what I mean. If someone is, Sister Beverly's having a hard time, and if Sister Peggy was listing off all the different ailments that she has, very obvious the type of caretaking that she needs. Also, you can take Sister Beverly to a certain place and get certain procedures and things done. And there are certain things, a large number of things, that we know the cure to. So if you can take this person to this place and get this done, and there's probabilities, and that's perhaps what often our hearts are most and minds are most gravitating towards in medical care. What's the probability? This works and is effective this percentage of the time, and it gives us a sense of relief because there's an element of science involved in it that we can base our hope, hear this, we can base our hope upon the certainties of physical causes and effects. Do this, this happens. And then usually, the fruit of such caretaking becomes measurable, which is a great encouragement. If you try something and it works, you keep doing it. If you try something and it doesn't work, you go to a different expert. You talk to a different person. You try a different method. Spiritual caretaking is not that way. And that's why it's so hard. And that's why it's so easy to quit doing that as a part of our hidden spiritual life. Most often what I have seen is that spiritual caretaking is connected to someone who, by all accounts, is physically doing wonderful. Oftentimes they're at the peak of their physical strength. Young people, I want you to hear this. There is an illusion to youth, and you learn it for certain every year that passes. There is a inbuilt part of our youthful mindset that thinks the strength that I have, the peace of mind that I have, will last forever. It's a universal pride of the human race. It's a presumption that we don't even realize that we have, but it's there. There is an illusion that I have arranged my life in such a fashion that it is impenetrable to those things that could jeopardize my aim and comfort. And I'll tell you this morning that the people with that mindset are often the ones that need the greatest amount of spiritual caretaking. Because their own hearts and the world and the devil have made an alliance to measure their life by what can be seen. But in 2 Corinthians, Paul said a statement about the Christian. We look not at the things which are seen, but the things that are not seen. For the things that are seen are temporary, but the things that are not seen are eternal. If I could say one of the greatest, if not the, I'm trying to think if this is an overstatement. That's why I'm pausing for a moment. I don't want to exaggerate this. One of the greatest differences between, and this is something you can perceive in yourself. So this isn't lost and saved, okay? The degree to which your life is governed by the seen or the unseen is the degree to which you are living in accordance with the hidden spiritual man. So let me extrapolate that for just a moment. If the decisions of your life are governed by your mind's analysis of what you can see, be certain you're not living the way God designed a Christian to live. We don't look at things that are seen. We don't say things like, well, they're young, they have a long time to find the Lord. Well, when I get older, I'll be faithful to the church. I'll ask the God questions later. We don't look at things that are seen. We look at things that are unseen. We don't look at countenance. We don't even just listen for the right words and verbiage. The Spirit of God often brings to light through spiritual discernment the needs of this fallen world that are unseen. I would pose to you today that there are people in this congregation that are on their spiritual deathbeds. And I'm not just talking about lost people. Some of you this morning have the illusion that life is great. And according to your standards, it is. And yet you need healing. You need healing for the things that are not seen. This morning, I want to look at 3 stories in pretty succinctly, because there's a lot I'm going to leave out with each story, that deals with why often we don't bring those people to Jesus. So in other words, if I'm spiritually caretaking, there's often a substitute that we employ. We worry. We become overbearing. We nag people about maybe our children, especially those close to us, right? You need to be doing this. We have all sorts of responses. And the main emphasis this morning that I want to place before you is a really simple one. It's that whoever you're spiritually caretaking for, bring them to Jesus. Not just in your heart, bring them to Jesus. I want to turn this morning to a passage in John chapter 8. This is an interesting passage to bring here, and I avoided doing this almost, but I kept getting drawn as I was meditating upon these thoughts to this passage. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because most of you are acquainted with quite a bit of this. It's interesting to me that John, so for those of you that may not know, the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke record a lot of the same stories. Whole lot of overlap. So in a couple of the stories we're going to read a little later, I had to go and read each account because they're found in Matthew and Mark and Luke. John, I think there's only one story in John that's found in one of the other Gospels, maybe a couple of the other Gospels. There might be 2, but I think there's only one. John is full of fresh stories, new stories we don't have anywhere else. I find it fascinating that 2 of the stories, now he doesn't tell a whole lot of stories about people's interactions with Jesus. 2 of the stories are about somebody caught in adultery or somebody highly participating in adultery. John chapter 4, the woman at the well. And now John chapter 8, a woman who, and I'm not going to go through all the context of this other than to say, the main character of the story is not the woman. She's a side issue. She's just a means for people to catch Jesus. That's all she is. So when people try to read into Jesus' response and how we should respond to people committing adultery, that's not what we're supposed to do with this story. There's a bigger context going on here. John chapter 8, what happens is this. There's these men that are predators against Jesus. They're wanting to prove anything wrong about him in order to vindicate themselves. And I'll say this morning, there's a lot of people today, non-Christians especially, but some Christians, who want to try to find a way not to surrender their life to Jesus because there's some defect in how he's going to treat you. Listen to me today. You can do all the investigation you want into the person of Jesus, and I've spent the last 21 years of my life reading this book intensely, and all that conclusion I can come to is there is nothing about the person of Jesus where you will find a flaw. Nothing about him. He is perfect. And get out, I want to encourage you, get out your microscope and look. Isn't that what we don't want people to do with our lives? Get out the microscope to our lives? We often think of that at my house. We kind of do general pickups at my house. We keep it clean. But don't look in the corners. Don't look in my boys' room especially, all right? It's dirty. It's not Tommy Compton standards, all right? I know he's got some standards, some high standards. You're going to find a lot of dirt. I've noticed here, some of you are going to come over and see this, our fan in the living room. It's pretty nasty. I got to take care of it, right? If you look close, you're going to see problems. Look closely at Jesus. As a matter of fact, look more closely at him than you look at anybody else. He is beyond perfect. There's no word or language that can explain what you will find when you look at Jesus. So these people come, and one of the things I marvel about this story is sometimes I wonder, and I'm sure you do this when you hear a question, when somebody asks somebody else a Bible question, but you're not responsible for giving the answer, you think, ooh, I'm glad I wasn't asked that. I wonder how I would answer on the spot. This is one of those stories for me that has always just overwhelmed me. What would I have done? Because the nuance to this story is so important. This woman wasn't an adulteress a month ago, 5 years ago. They caught her in the act. Within the hour, she was at the height of guilt. And these Pharisees catch wind of this evidently. I imagine what happened. I don't know this. This is my imagination. The husband comes home. And in Jewish law, he has some pretty broad rights as to what to do. And part of that involves the Jewish community. And so he brings her out. Whether that's the way it led into this next part, I don't know. What I do know is that the Pharisees catch wind of this, and instead of seeing her broken home and the marriage, instead of seeing the children, instead of seeing all the dynamics that are most central to the need, they say, let's use this to get Jesus. And so they bring this woman and they drag her before Jesus. She is, from the human vantage point, at that very moment, the definition of a sinner. Universally, everyone, our corrupt hearts, but also in accordance with God's moral law, she is a sinner, and the sin is fresh. And with sinful ulterior motives, hear this, with sinful ulterior motives, she's brought before Jesus. And what I think the people want is judgment. Why? Why would they want Jesus to do that? Well, because Jesus is healing everybody. He's showing love to everybody. I think what the Pharisees were and what they were doing is they had this self-righteous, hard, angry, intimidating persona, and people, they knew in their hearts that people obeyed them from fear and compliance. That's why they followed them. And they see and are jealous of the fact that people are not following Jesus because they're afraid. They're following Jesus because Jesus loves people. And here was a chance for Jesus to not love somebody. Here was a chance to catch him hurting someone, stoning someone. It would harden the persona of Jesus in the eyes of the people. But if he didn't, it would show him as clearly unjust and in conflict with the law. And yet, does that not well explain very often When sinful situations in your home, in your family, in your workplace come before you, is that not where you stand between the rock and the hard place? I'm either going to cast harsh judgment that's going to be misinterpreted and misunderstood, or I'm going to be permissive of sin, which will metastasize, and a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And so here I am as this final arbiter of not even making a decision, but just people want to know my opinion. And how do I give an opinion to something like that? And Jesus is put in this situation, and his response is perfect. I'm not going to get into a response other than to say it was perfect. Here's what I want to tell you about this as it relates to us. Often we don't bring people to Jesus because the people that we're spiritually caretaking for are in great, fresh sin. There's this element of they're unworthy. They're living in sin. That's one that we can often... I'm just telling you the thoughts, unfiltered, that can run... I'm not saying these thoughts are right. They're just thoughts that run through my heart and mind. I think that about myself sometimes. You ever had something where... maybe here's an example. Maybe you've been a little quick-tempered lately. Somebody's pointed it out to you and you say, okay, I need to stop being quick-tempered. And it had gotten to the level where you're feeling a little guilty for it. And so you go before the Lord and you say, Lord, I'm sorry. I don't want to. And there's a sincerity in your request. And then, have you ever had this experience? Within 10 minutes, you do the exact same thing. The very thing that you just vowed with your lips to God that you would not do, and you were sincere when you said it. As far as you know, you were sincere. But within 10 minutes, you get done with that little event, and then the irony strikes you. Let me ask you a question. In that moment, what do? Do you avoid God or run back to him? I can tell you what the temptation is. It's to run away from him. Do you know what that temptation, I think, is? It's that there's shame. We feel shame. We feel this enhanced sense of guilt because we just made the promise. You see, it's easy when we're looking at situations like a woman caught in adultery to say, well, it's a grave sin, just take it to Jesus. But what about something like I just described that plays out every day, that, listen to me, are real wedges between people and God on the day-to-day? Because I would say this very often, my experience, and you've experienced this, people in great sin have no covering for sin, so they're willing to run to Jesus. But those who have coverings, those who think what they're doing are slights, not sins. Don't run to Jesus. I'll tell you, if it's the shame that's causing you not to run to him because you just made a promise 10 minutes ago, here's what I want to tell you to do. Bring it to Jesus. That's what I love about this story. They bring her to Jesus with malintent. And whether it's with the malintent to harm her, maybe some parents and grandparents would be tempted to bring somebody to Jesus to enable the kid. Lord, I just don't want you to punish them, so indulge. They come with the wrong intent. Or maybe it's the right intent. The message I want to pass on to you today is, when you're in sin, when those you're spiritually caretaking for are in sin, go to Jesus. Just go to Jesus. You know what's interesting about what Jesus did in this account, and then I'll move to the next one, is he's so calm. You ever thought about the composure of Jesus? It's an amazing thing through the scriptures to read. He's brought to the brow of a cliff. and people are about to kill him, and he's composed. I want you to know this. When you go to God in prayer and there's great intensity of emotion, be it shame or guilt or grief, God is not overwhelmed. What I mean is this. He is not mirroring the pitch of your emotion. He's not callous to it. But he's not moved in the sense of he's reciprocating the intensity that often leads to misjudgment. He's stable and strong. He's the one that you run to that holds you while you're an emotional fit. This person comes to Jesus in that condition. Why else don't we go to Jesus? I want to read another story for you that indicates this. It's found in Mark chapter 5. This is part of where we began. I've got to give a little bit more to the story because this is one of the, again, perhaps I'm sure it's a weakness of mine, tendency to get overwhelmed. I have a tendency to get overwhelmed sometimes. So many things, irons in the fire, and just Jesus has composure here in Mark chapter 5. There's two stories going on, and to understand the power of both stories, you got to know, to understand the power of each story, you got to know that both are going on at the same time. There's a context here going on in Mark 5 where Jesus is, I think, either at the height of his fame or close to the height of his fame. So this isn't people have turned against him and he's controversial yet. He's getting there. But right now, all through Galilee, so if you think of Galilee, it's like a province. So it'd be like us saying Warren County, except for over there, it was a lot smaller than I think what Warren County would be. So here, Jesus comes to the other side to this area, and there's a man, a ruler, who's got great power, who comes to him named Jairus. Evidently, it's like an ER situation. I mean, it's an ER. They're about to die. The daughter's about to die. I'll do anything to get help. The movie we watched, we saw that in the Apostle Paul, that I'll avoid certain things for a while, but then I'll come to a point of desperation. Whatever will help will help. I think there's an important lesson in that. Here, this man waits to come to Jesus until when? And maybe it was something that spiked at the last second. It's an emergency. He comes to Jesus, and he is terrified. Then, in the midst of literally walking to Jesus, there's this great crowd that's all peripheral noise. Now, I think this is an important point to make. I hadn't thought of it until right now. How distracting is the peripheral noise in your life that prevents you from bringing people to Jesus? All these people are thronging Jesus. All these people are pulling at him. We see that today very often with celebrities and athletes. They go to somewhere and the paparazzi's everywhere. Some people's lives, hear me how absurd it is, how depraved human nature is that the obsession of somebody's life can just be taking pictures and looking at other fallible people. And yet that's the world we live in, and it's a form of having idols. Truly, it's like having an idol. Worshiping. My life is bowed down to the acknowledgement of somebody else. And so we see people they have to live in gated communities. They have to take special vehicles. They have to do things in secret. They have to go to restaurants. This is getting to be the fame of Jesus. People they just want to touch him. They just want to see him. They want to go back and say, I touched him. I saw him. And in the midst of it, there's a woman who touches him, and through having faith, an issue she had had for 12 years, she's healed. And Jesus, now, I've never worked in an ER. I've been in an ER a number of times. It's a pretty hectic place. There's an ER need in room 5, and Jesus is walking there, and then suddenly, he stops to have a casual conversation, right? He begins to engage with this woman and talk to her. And as he's turning back to go to room 5, A servant comes and says, your daughter's dead. Interestingly, though, what precedes, or what comes right after it, look at verse, let's see this. Let me see here. Okay, verse 35, let's read it real quick. It says this is our scripture reading. While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, thy daughter is dead. Then, notice that's descriptive. Notice the next words are prescriptive. Thy daughter is dead. That's a fact. But now, the person advising this man has a prescription for him. Because your daughter's dead, why troublest thou the master any further? This one's going to hurt, so sorry. Sometimes the reason we don't bring people to Jesus is because those that care most about us are hurting our spiritual life and not helping it. We're taking advice from Job's friends. You know, I heard that a couple years ago. I was having a personal struggle, and I had been given some advice, which now I know to be bad advice, but I was wrestling with it really hard. And I shared that personal advice with a close friend. And I said, you know, I've not known what to do with this advice. There's elements of truth for it. And his exact words just resound in my heart, have resounded in my heart 1,000 times, it feels like, since then. He says, beware of Job's friends. You know what Job's friends did at the very beginning? Job lost everything. His wife speaks up and says, curse God and die. Now, that's really important. That's the closest circle, right? Within the closest circle. Not saying, go to God. God is faithful. Trust his promises. That's not what the closest circle is saying. It's saying, curse God and die. And then some friends come for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, they sit in silence. Now, sometimes that's a really good thing. But here's what we know what Job's friends were doing for those 2 weeks. They were preparing an argument to implicate him or indict him. Those 2 weeks, they weren't there to just be present to love him. They were likely listening to all of his mourning, building their case as to how he offended God and why they were wrong and why he was wrong and all the things. And I find that so common today with religious people. Us. We can all be guilty of this. We hear of a situation and we think that we have the authority not to just be descriptive, but we venture into being prescriptive. We just newly heard about something going on in a family or something going on in a marriage, and we say things like this, yeah, I've always felt like I didn't like that person. I've always felt like that person was a little this way or a little that way, or yeah, if they would have done this different with their kids, then this would have been this way, different in this way. And it is quick, just like being quick-tempered. It's a terrible thing to be quick prescriptive. Because usually the things that really matter are below the surface, and we've never seen them. Here, the problem was unbelief. And what enhanced that problem is that the servant who came, implicit in their prescription, was doubting the power of Jesus. That was the problem. Why are you troubling him anymore? Your daughter's dead. Leave him alone. Give up. And very often I've found it to be the case that some of you have particular people in your life and you know that they need some spiritual caretaking. You know that they're at this place of just, they're 10 times worse spiritually off than the woman caught in adultery. And the situations are complicated. You know, that's one of the things that I have learned about why people hate Christian counseling. Is because very often the prescription
oversimplifies the problem. But listen, when we have a problem of the soul, all the strands that lead into that problem are real. And they often go back for decades. And the healing is needed for the soul, but to understand the condition of the soul of the person, sometimes you have to understand the things that led up to it. And to be simple and prescriptive at times, I think, turns people away. It makes them feel like, you don't care about me, you care about your dogma. That's what you care about. You care about your belief system, and you think that you can just take these set of static principles and just say, do this and you'll be healed. That's often not the case. It's complicated often. People's lives are complicated. But Jesus is powerful. That's the counterbalancing weight of all this. We don't become overwhelmed by how complicated the human life can become. We respect it. We acknowledge it. We recognize that it takes often delicate gloves and great amounts of love yet explored in order to handle such matters. But let me say this with no equivocation. The power of Jesus far outweighs the complication of any situation on earth that is or ever has been. Your life or the people you're spiritually caretaking for, whether it be something where they're lost in sin, whether it be something that their Christian life is tied up in all sorts of immoralities that are completely hidden from all the people in their life and your life, and you know a little bit about it. Maybe there's mental problems and addiction. Maybe there's just so much going on you don't even know how to untangle where the first knot to start untying is. Let me tell you this. Jesus has all power, and there is no power, even death. That's the awesome thing about this story. They brought the ultimate power to him. Listen to this. It started with she's sick. It progressed to she's dead. Now here's a really important point. You ever have a situation you started bringing to Jesus and your built-in expectation was, now that I've brought it to him, it's all going to start getting better. A seed of unbelief begins with human expectation. It's forgetting the promise of Isaiah 55. His ways are higher than our ways, as the heavens are above the earth. I know that to be true. I know it to be true. I doubt it a lot. It's not a present truth all the time, but it's a truth. And what I mean is present is in my heart. It's not present all the time. See, this situation, it started with, okay, I got to Jesus finally. Then I got to, he's paying attention to me. Like, think about it, a mob, a crowd of people. He's been going everywhere healing. You think this is the only guy saying, come help me? You ever feel like you're just too small to get the attention of Jesus? Your situation's too small, your person's too small, they're too detached from religion. Let me tell you this, every human soul God cares about, everyone, every single human soul God cares about. Little infant child, old person who's not been mentally present for many, many years. God cares about everyone. The situation, they get it to Jesus, and it goes from bad to worse. And then, add more problems. There's words of discouragement that are basically saying the situation is hopeless. Give up. Stop spiritually caretaking. And this is where the powerful words of Jesus come in. I can't tell you how many times I've read that verse 36. Just those few, 5 words? And that God, through His Spirit, in various settings and situations, has just made that truth feel more than alive. He says this, The man just heard his daughter died. And here's Jesus' words. Be not afraid, only believe. Now, I'll say this and I'll begin to close. I was going to read another passage, but I'm not going to this morning. In this particular case, this came past the moment of despair. The despair had set in when they learned she was dead. Now we're despairing. And that's when Jesus says, be not afraid. Trust me. Trust me. There's a story. So here's the encouragement I want to give you. Very often when we have been spiritually caretaking, I thought of some of you here, actually, when I was preparing this message, and some of the, some of the fatigue that I saw in you when you were caretaking for your family. Like it was very, I thank you for your devotion because it was a great encouragement to me in preparing this message. It brought some spiritual vividness to these truths. So I sincerely thank some of you for letting me see your exhaustion and commitment. You just didn't quit. You just didn't quit. What really moved me particularly with some of you is you were faithful till the very end. Just like Jesus. Here's the breath of encouragement I want to give you. When you're spiritually caretaking for someone, don't allow what you see to govern the faith you have in the one who has the power to change it. I've been praying, Brother Brad, for my grandchild. I've been praying for my son. I've been praying for this person that they would be concerned about their soul. I've been doing this for years and nothing that I can see. And that's the key. Nothing that you can see. But listen to me this morning. By the authority of God's word, there's a story that's so powerful in Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through, I can't remember, 8 or 10, about the widow, the persistent widow, where what Jesus is teaching, the sole thing that he's teaching in that passage, there's singular, one thing he's teaching, one thing about prayer he's teaching. Don't give up. Don't quit. Listen to me, a danger of our age is that because everything natural is instant, that we then accuse God when the spiritual realm does not mirror the natural realm. We cannot do that. We cannot give up. Brother Ron told me this week that their neighbor passed away. I can't even repeat his name. I don't remember it all. Far as I know, I never laid eyes on him. But I have thought this week, where a tree falls, there it lies. And I've thought about his soul. I hope he came to know the Lord. I don't know if he did or didn't, and I'm not trying to hurt you all by bringing this up at all. But it has brought the intensity of just how important persevering for those we love truly is. Sometimes we doubt because there's a delay of time. Don't fall to that. It's an instinct of your nature and mine, and it's exacerbated by our culture and the way we live. Don't live with instant expectations. Live faithful to the promises of God. Don't be afraid. You know, I I love that part of it too. He doesn't say don't doubt, but believe. He says do not be afraid. Why? I'm going to close with this because this is a hard one for me to say. I'll confess a sin of my heart is I have a lot of fear. I have a lot of fear. And as far as I can diagnose it, and it's never good to diagnose your own spiritual problem, so I'm not recommending it. But as far as I can tell, it is solely because of a lack of faith. Like that is the preeminent, that's the root. There are other branches, there's other things, but that's the root. It's a lack of faith. And so when I trace back those fears, it's faith that I lack. I'm afraid for my children not finding the Lord. I'm afraid for your children and grandchildren not finding the Lord. I could list a whole lot of things I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of these young people's lives being just spiritually worthless for the next 50 years. I worry about that a lot. A lot. I worry about that. I worry about the community around us not hearing the gospel with us sitting right here in between them. I worry about that a lot. A lot of worries. So this verse that Jesus said is just, it's such a salve to my soul. Be not afraid. Only believe. I want to advocate to you this morning, if you are a spiritual caretaker who has set down your responsibility for a few years, take this as your prodding to pick up that duty again for your hidden spiritual life. Start spiritually caretaking for the people you're responsible for. If you've been doing it for a while and you're exhausted, be not afraid. Only believe. If you've never done it because you've always been so self-focused, consider this an invitation to you. I would say, I'm making this up in the sense of how I frame it in my mind. This is not some thing straight from the Word. Very often a young Christian is defined by how much that they think about their own spiritual life and themselves. That's spiritual infancy. Some people are spiritual infants for 60, 70 years. They never grow out of spiritual infancy because everything is filtered through how things spiritually affect them. When you begin to go from crawling to just toddling and walking, spiritual toddler, is when 10% of the time, just 10%, 90% you're still working on growing, and there's health in that. There's a healthy thing to do that. But 10% of the time, you begin to desire to caretake for others. You start filtering. You know whenever you get full grown? You know when you get to be that mother whose whole life is just surrendered to the care of others? What Paul exhibited to us? That's spiritual maturity. The last thing you think about is yourself. You're so consumed with caring for others. That's something for all of us to aspire to, isn't it? Consider this, if you've always filtered things through, how does this affect my spiritual life? There's an element of that that's healthy, but if that's what you're governed by, I want to invite you to a higher plane. Start being a spiritual caretaker, and here's a piece of practical advice. Find one person, just one, to caretake for. One person, and here's what I'll tell you is this. God has an amazing way. You go to the hospital, you just get whatever doctor comes in when you're in the ER. You know what's wonderful about the Lord? To His people, God assigns us patients. He gives us people. Has nothing to do with relationship with them. It's a divine intervention. God says, you spiritually caretake for that person. I remember the first time it was done for me. First time I ever got that. I was 15 years old. A girl that I grew up with. She's probably 5 years younger than me. She's quite a bit younger than me. She was lost. She had an illness. And at times she was in the hospital. It was really serious. I was about 15. And I would just randomly think about that girl. I'd be in class and I'd just zone out, which I did most of the time. But sometimes the zoning wasn't video game and sports. It was unbidden. And I would just whisper this prayer, please, Lord, help her to get saved so that if she dies, she's safe. I was a little embarrassed because it was a girl, and I was in that awkward age, right, of puberty, and the whole thing was there. I later came to realize that that's just something God does. I've had people before that, for some reason, I met them one time. I just can't get them off my mind. I think the way to interpret that is, I'm their caretaker, spiritually. I've had it before. I'm trying to close. Bear with me. I knew I was going to have a one-time interaction with, oftentimes it's happened with kids for me. Like I was going to have a one-time interaction. I'd probably never see those people again. I would just say, Lord, if nobody ever in that person's whole life prays for their soul, hear this one fleeting prayer. My job, I think, in that moment, because it was brought by the Spirit to my mind, was caretake for this moment. And then I hand them off to the Lord, and I never even think about them again. This morning, I want to give you an invitation to spiritual caretaking. That's our message today. I hope it was an encouragement to you to hear as it was for me to study. Let's have a song, Sister Ashley, if you don't mind, and let's all stand and we can sing. And certainly if you feel the need to pray, if you're lost or you're saved, we always want to give you that freedom to do so if you feel the need to pray.